obviously you built a strong name for yourself, but let's kind of rewind that tape a little bit and see, do you remember, if you remember, when your first race was where you saw another big name in the entry list of that same race that you're competing in?
I would say the first time something like that happened was probably with Anthony Alfredo, who's a close friend of mine. I've known him since he was back running K&N, and that's when I was working the media circuit as well with NASCAR, where if I was within driving distance of a track or could get to a track and get a credential, I would just show up and record stuff from my podcast at the time. And I met Anthony, and he's been amazing, but he was definitely the first big name that I raced with. But there have been other times where I've been in there and, you see all these amazing people. I would say the first major one that comes to mind, though, was I've been on iRacing for about 3 years now, but I've only seen Dale Jr. on there like once or twice. And it was in April of 2020, May of 2020, somewhere in there. And this was right after the setup shop had started up. We were just doing like short track stuff, so like 3 or 4 cars. And I was in an SK modified race at Martinsville with him. And I had started further back and I was driving through the field. I actually passed him and I was like through the roof about it. And then we were talking about setups in the chat. And Dale at the time was streaming. And I still got the video. I said like, yeah, anyone that needs help with the setup, I'm more than happy to help you. And he goes, where's he running? Running third? He's only a second and a half off. And he comes on the mic. He goes, hey, Jeff, if you don't mind, I'll take that setup. I'm like, oh my God. Like Dale Jr.'s asking me for one of my setups. And I go, oh man.
Blank checks coming your way.
I go, man, I don't really know. Like, I don't want to just give it away. I'm like, no, absolutely, dude. That is totally fine. And we hung out for a couple minutes afterwards. I was like talking to him. He goes, yeah, I tried out a South Boston setup and it wasn't really working and all this other stuff. I go, well, I took a Stafford setup and I sort of changed the gear and did some work with the front end. But that was definitely that first moment for me after, at the time, 2 years on the service of, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of someone famous. And I was starstruck, fangirling, whatever you want to call it. I couldn't believe it, but that was really cool.
And with that, you mentioned that you're friends with Anthony Alfredo. When did you first start working with him on iRacing?
So now he and I have different accounts of this story, but I have the audio tapes to back this up. I, at the time, ran a radio show out at Purdue University. I just graduated from there in May, but at the time I was a sophomore. And in the basement of my dorm, Wiley Hall, there was a radio station. And I had Anthony on. I invited him to come on the show, and he was very gracious and did so. And we were talking about iRacing, and he was not on iRacing at the time. He had an account, but he hadn't used it in a while, and he was just sort of sitting dormant. And I was like, man, I bet if I were, if we were to race together on there, I could beat you, no problem. He's like, oh, there's no way, man. My stats are all super old, but I could beat you. And I pulled up his stats live on air, and I still have the recording somewhere. And his stats were so bad. He was getting beat in like the Street Stocks rookie series. And this is from, I think it was from like 2013 when he was 15 years old. Like he had just built his computer and everything. And I gave him a hard enough time that he got back on iRacing, and then he and I would race together from there. So we did Street Stocks and we did a ton of modifieds. He loves racing the modifieds. They are a ton of fun, the tour mods. Because that's what I used to run. I made my name on iRacing running the tour mods. I was the first person to hit 100 wins in those. I had the record for most wins overall, most wins in a season. I still hold the record for most wins at New Hampshire, Martinsville, Stafford, and probably a couple other places that I don't even know about. But I love the tour mods. And so we ran a lot of those when we would run together. And yeah, I take full responsibility for getting him back on there. And I still remember the day that he passed me in iRating. And now we're just about even, somewhere in the 4,000 range, going back and forth with it. But there is no one that I have met on iRacing in all of my time on there, my thousands of races and all the different people I've raced against. There is no one that is more competitive and that I want to beat more when I'm racing than Anthony Alfredo. If I'm in a race with him, I'm going to do everything I can except wreck the guy to get around him and try and beat him. But it is just, we are dead even. I mean, skill wise, we are dead even.
That sounds like a Kyle Larson and a Christopher Bell kind of relationship. You guys are so competitive on the track.
Oh yeah. I mean, it is just there's one video. This was actually the first time I met Dave Cameron, the YouTuber, and started working with him as well. Not many people know that we do all of Dave Cameron's asphalt oval setups. So he's got access to all those. He's an amazing guy. Love talking to him. As of the time of recording this, it's his birthday. So I want to say happy birthday, Dave. And I'm going to send that over to him. So I got that in, but he is an amazing person as well. But in the race where Anthony and I met Dave Cameron, it was a fixed tour mod race at Iowa Speedway. So we had the same setup, same everything. It was like a 16-20 car field, so a big race for that series. And we are there, and it's like 5-10, I think it was like 5 laps to go. And we get the restart, and we are just side by side. We're pulling away from the entire field. We're easily the fastest guys out there. And we are side by side, lap after lap after lap after lap. And it came down to the line, and he beat me by maybe an inch. I think it was like 0.02 of a second. And I still get sometimes people tweeting the clip at me where he beats me to the line and the results pop up and Anthony's going, yes, yes, yes. And I'm just screaming in agony. No.
And unfortunately, you reminded me of a modified race I ran at Iowa. God, it has to be like 6 years ago. I was blowing the field away. And this is when the races were long enough that you had pit stops.
Mm-hmm.
I was 6 laps short on fuel.
Oh, God, yeah. That is the worst.
Yeah.
That is the worst.
Man. And I want to say there was somebody, one of the big names in that race, but I can't remember who it was. I think he got wrecked out early, so I don't want to say who I'm thinking in case I'm wrong, but like you said, we can blame you for bringing Anthony Alfredo back onto the service. Yep. And I'll blame you for that as far as him kicking our butts in the Monday Night Racing League. But
yes,
how did you get connected with Monday Night Racing and Richmond Raceway Esports and Podium?
Well, oh man, those are all 3 crazy relationships that all sort of came to a head at once. So I got linked up with Podium because when I was still getting my feet wet on iRacing, like I mentioned earlier, I was really well known in the short track community. I was the best in the modifieds on the old chassis and tire model and everything. I'm still okay, but I'm not nearly as good as I once was because I don't sit and run them all day anymore. But I was really good and well known for those. And I got into broadcasting with a guy named Phil Lacasse, who was local to New England. Gave me a spot up with Full Velocity Racing Network calling races for the East-West Racing Series. And it was a ton of fun working with him up in the booth and everyone at Full Velocity Racing Network. And with that, I sort of got into broadcasting. And when the whole pandemic and everything started in March of last year, I was also working at Stafford Motor Speedway as an announcer in real life. So when I sort of got the call from Stafford, that they wanted to do a virtual series, not only was I building the setups for that series, I was also calling them. And because they wanted me on as the voice of East Stafford Speedway, I got hooked up with GSRC, the Global Sim Racing Channel, and Sean Ambrose and that whole team there. So I spent some time calling races with them, and I loved working with them. They're amazing people over there. And through all that, I sort of built up a repertoire, and I was like, okay, I can do setups on the side, and I'm going to be an iRacing broadcast. So that's the way it looked at the time. And I got the call, I think it was the day of the eNASCAR Road to Pro finale, and I think it was it couldn't have been November of last year. It was
the finale would have been December.
I don't think it was that late. It was whatever race was at Phoenix. So whichever, if that was the end of the series,
that'd be Road to Pro. Then
then might
have been October.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think it was October, the end of Road to Pro, before it was split into the two rounds like it is now. And they needed someone up in the booth and to help them call the race. And I was like, oh my gosh, Podium Esports wants me. That's insane. So I got to go up there and work with James Pike. That was the first time I worked with him, and Ryan Bauer and that whole team there. So that was really phenomenal, and that went really well. And from there, we just I would keep in touch with Ryan Bauer, the executive producer there. We talked a bunch, but I didn't really start picking up work a lot with them. I do a couple special events here and there, but when Road to Pro started coming around for this year and they got the call again of, hey, we want Podium to broadcast it, they said, I got a message one day or a call one day, and it was Ryan Bauer, and he said, hey, I want you to be the analyst for the eNASCAR Road to Pro series. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's insane. And at this point I had sort of gotten out of iRacing broadcasting. I was focused entirely on the setup shop. I was focused on building the company and everything else, and focused on school because I was still a full-time student and everything. Just so much going on in my life. It was absolutely crazy. And I was like, yeah, I'd be honored to. And so I've been helping out and calling races with them, and that sort of really got that relationship with Podium going and kicked into overdrive with everything going on, and being able to call races with them every other Thursday night. It's been absolutely amazing. I never really saw myself as being the head analyst for the eNASCAR Road to Pro series. And then it all just sort of came together. And with Monday Night Racing, it was Anthony running in the series, and I would help him out there with, giving tips and tricks and all that for the different tracks, because that's a fixed setup series. And I had sort of heard of it, and they had come to me asking about some advertising and sponsorship, and we had made it all work. And then I got to go down to Charlotte where they did their real world race. They did a real world go-kart race, and that was a ton of fun. I was there. I know, we met there. That was a ton of fun. And I met Ford Martin in person, the guy behind the scenes there, that the brains behind the operation. I met him, I talked to him, and then we sort of put a deal together where we're the last lap sponsor for the event. And then we also, for any track that doesn't have an iRacing setup or a good iRacing setup that works for the time of day and conditions they want to run, I would build the setup for them. And we would get, we get sponsorship perks and everything else throughout there. But it's going to be so much, it's gotten to be so much fun working with them. It's such an amazing league, and there's more news coming down the pipeline with Maconi Setup Shop and myself with that league. So I'm very excited when that all comes around, but there's a lot of cool things in the works.
Well, can I just say, this is me being a little selfish. Can you make some of the steps a little tighter for my liking?
I'll tell you what, Ford has come back to us and said, give us something racy. Give us something that people can drive. Give us something loose. I want something that can run any lane of the track. And I remember, I think it was Atlanta, and every time we'd get it, every time Ford would get the setup, he'd go, we need it looser. We need it looser. We need something racier. And I'm like, dude, I'm throwing everything I've got at this to make it as racy as possible. And David Schildhouse hated the setup. He was like,
I remember that.
He's like, this thing is so bad to drive. It's this, it's that. And I'm like, I'm watching, I'm going, dude, I'm just doing what Ford asked me. Like, oh man. And then he won the race.
See, that was one of my favorite races and setups so far. I started like 38th or so, and I was able to drive my way through the field to the lead during pit stops. Mm-hmm. Was a lap down after pit stops, but catching the leader, caught a caution, got the free pass, and got myself back up to, I think it was 13th or so when the checkered flag waved. And that's been one of my favorite races so far, at least with one of your sets, no offense. But one of my favorite races so far, just because I haven't been that competitive in the league other than on super speedways. So that showed me a little bit more that I am still a little competitive. I might be a little rusty, but I am competitive.
There you go. And yeah, that one especially was one that we had to do quite a few revisions on to make sure Ford was happy. So that was That was a fun one though. I enjoyed that one. And the Darlington race coming up, we're going to have something together for that. It's going to be pretty similar to what we gave people for the Podium Retro 500 preliminary races. So we built those setups. And funny story there, that was a miscommunication of 3 different people running the event, and everyone thought someone else had asked me to build the setup. So then the day before the first qualifier race, I get a text saying, "Hey, is that setup ready, by the way?" And I go, "I don't know what you're talking about." And they go, the 87 cars at Darlington that you're supposed to have built. And I went, okay, no one asked me for this, so I can get on this right away. Also, how much I hate the 87 cars. You know how much I hate Darlington. So 6 hours of, tears and agony later, I sent them the setup and I said, this is as stable as I can make this thing. You just got to drive it, whatever feels comfortable, but it's very easy to overdrive this thing and burn it off. Like, there's nothing more I can do to this. And they liked it. So I don't know how that all worked out, but yeah, that was if you want a glimpse behind the scenes, there's a lot of times where just communication doesn't always work out, and then we sort of get something together. But even in those cases, we can still put out something good.